All right. Good morning, everybody. Let's see what we have going on in the markets today. See what kind of opportunity we have for ES. We can also look at NQ, and then I want to look at a couple of the top holders in ES as well, just to see if there's any sort of movement or any anomalies in some of the top position holders of SPY slash ES to understand what kind of opportunity we have today. So the very first thing I do look at usually in the morning is just Milk's yellow box chart that he posts uh, in our chart channel every day. Milk builds his own yellow box with a couple other levels, and I really do appreciate that because we get a couple of other insights beyond just our yellow box strategy. So the very first thing that I do want to note this morning is that we had a really, really big gap up last night during extended trading hours open. So if you guys will notice, on Friday, we ended up closing at 68.25 and ended up gapping all the way up to 68.81. So there's a really, really big gap on the day, so we will talk about that. But one of the things I do want to show is how our Friday trade ended up actually working out. So if you guys were in premium on Friday with us, we were actually watching price pretty closely during New York session open. One of the things that I really wanted was a move up to this like 68.35-ish area. We ended up having actually a lot of stacked resistance and open states on our fractals charts in this zone. So we were actually able to be really, really patient and get a move down to all the way down to the 68.22. Our stacked vectors were around 68.22 that morning, and I really wanted to see us break and hold below 68.22 for continuation down. We ended up having a really boring day. I think we had our PMI numbers. That's what this big candle's for. So I was partially expecting volatility to the downside to try to fill that candle, but also knowing that we were so close to our ceiling on SPY, I was a little bit worried that we were going to just get pinned up to our ceiling because it was Friday. A lot of times when we have data on Friday, sometimes we have great movement, but more often than not, we tend to have really good movement for like 90 minutes or 2 hours into New York Open, and then we kind of get pinned to either a ceiling or to our vectors, and that's kind of exactly what happened. So we ended up one and done on a trade on Friday for 13 points, which ended up actually being pretty clean. We barely dealt with any drawdown on that one because we had a really nice entry. So looking into today then, like I said, one of the big things that I'm noticing right off the bat is we do have this really, really big gap. Um, we had this really, really big gap up when ETH opened. I was trying to look to see what the heck was this, if it was like news or something. As you guys know, I don't really trade during ETH, so I didn't like spend too much time trying to look at this. Especially too from a fundamental perspective, like news is good to be aware of, um, especially nowadays with like Trump administration, anytime he puts out an abrasive tweet, it tends to kind of move things pretty quickly. But I'm actually not exactly sure what want to push this. Regardless, did push us all the way up into our IV walls on Milk's yellow box chart, and kind of caused us to just get pinned to SPY's ceiling for the whole night. Um, One of the things that I was thinking about doing for an ETH play was to look for some sort of ceiling rejection, but I wasn't really finding any other like high density areas on our fractals charts to find any sort of logical rejections. But one of the things I do like looking at for ETH is if we move this to a 15 minutes, we can see it a little bit better. So on a 15-minute chart, one of the things I really like to do is just to see have technicals on the yellow box chart behaved as they should behave. And when I say that is traditionally our IV walls to the top side and the bottom side, these are these green lines. We like to see rejections off of our IV walls. If we end up moving up into them and even breaking above them, that's kind of a big signal for me to be hands off on the day, because it tends to be an outlier. And again, remember, our implied volatility walls are kind of what market makers set up in terms of call and put hedging to make sure that we do not get above or below those prices, because that's when our big institutions start losing money. And those guys are going to do everything they can, of course, to keep making money. So with that being said, our Ivy wall hasn't really been respected overnight, so I'm a little bit weary of that. Further, we just in general have a lot of consolidation overnight, so this isn't super telling. Like again, for example, if you kind of go back to Friday, it's actually a pretty clean example. We saw us open in the yellow box, which is our essentially our average range, and then we had a nice clean break below, or sorry, a break above our yellow box, a retest back in on the 15-minute, and excuse me, ended up eventually winning, having a yellow box win, which is our 1-to-1 risk to get us up to our top of average range. The rejection back down to a top of average range, practically touched the yellow box again, saw a nice resistance on average range, and then we're able to play up to obviously this candle getting us up to our ceiling, and we really, really respected our ceiling levels up here as well. So this is one of the things I noticed on Friday too, is when I did take that trade, is we had a lot of respect for our volatility levels. And so I felt comfortable with a lot of those stacked open states up there, as well as stacked vector for resistive and supportive zones. So we don't really have a lot of clarity on if our zones are holding us supportive or resistive this morning. So we will try to observe the market probably for 15 minutes before we take any trades as New York session opens. Another thing that we can notice too is we're kind of stuck in between all these zones of a lot of what we're seeing as seller absorption in these zones. We're even seeing buyers being pretty active right here and a decent amount of selling to the top side as well. So those buyers and sellers have been pretty ambivalent. Our depth of market right now is trading at 110%, which is a little high. Our buyers are trying to be in control right here. And I actually think they were in control for most of the night. I did peep at our depth of market last night, and it was trading at around 105%. And so we haven't really seen our buyers become like overly active, even though they have been strong on our tape for most of the evening. Okay. So we talked about basics here. Let's actually get into fractals and see what kind of levels we have on our charts. Okay. So let's first look at ES because that is our baby. Let's start on a bigger time frame. So we'll look at our big time frames and try to zoom down, or yeah, zoom in, I guess is the right word. All right. So first we're going to look at the wave one daily with 200 days to load. Right now, you can see on our chart 6880.50 is where our vector's at. Let's go look and see where price currently is. Price is currently at 6881.50. So we're kind of using that wave one daily vector as supportive currently. We do have an open state up at 6890, and then we do have some open states here at 60, 55, and 52. I actually really like this density of open states from 60, 55, and 52. I'm going to actually mark 5577 and 5250 as a potential supportive area on our charts. So let's go back on our chart, and I'm going to mark that zone out real quick on our yellow box because to see open states on the wave one daily and this level of density is actually pretty cool to see. So 60, basically 61. This could be an area that you start a trade. 61 to 52 and a half is a pretty big zone for me, but we could mark this whole zone. I would probably look at an entry probably closer to 68.56. So 68.61 to 52.50. Let's go mark this real quick. There's 61. And we'll go all the way down to 52. There we go. And I'm going to color this in so we can actually see this. All right, cool. And then I also want to just put a note in here. So these are wave one daily open states. Okay. What I think I'm going to try to do then in that particular zone is look for additional open states on some of our smaller time frames to understand if we have additional supportive areas here. The other thing I do really like about looking at the wave one daily is we've had uh, 3 bullish days on the wave one. So if we do go into our option analyzer, we can see that moving into a third bullish day, kind of a closure of it, we have a 15% odds, and then an H4 is an even lower odds of moving higher day after day at only 3%. So I do like that for some potential short opportunity, especially because we are trading close to our 20% odds, which essentially just means we have a 20% chance of continuation higher when we hit these levels. And it's not too often you get this high on the wave one daily, actually. All right, so let's go look at the 7 wave 60. Oh man, I'm not surprised to see our charts looking like this today. All of our charts are going to be quite overextended because we had that almost 30-point move to the upside and are trading at our IV walls right now. So I think a lot of our charts are going to be probably really heavily indicating downside. So right now, the 7 wave 60s vector is trading at 68.83, and we do have another open state at 68.90. It's probably because we hit a high of day today at around 68.90. Let's go check that. Yep, exactly. So we have that high of day here at 68.90 from this opening candle. Um, that's kind of why we're seeing that open state on the wave one daily as well as the 7 wave 60. We should probably see it on most of our midterm timeframes as well. So we can note that as our high of day candle from ETH as well. I won't mark that one quite yet. 68, 30. The other thing we could potentially look at is below pivot to kind of see if we have any opportunity of open states to the downside. One of the things I do want to note here is for those of you who are newer to fractals, we don't tend to look at linear charts or we don't look at linear charts when we are looking at our fractals charts. What this is showing is long waves and short waves, and it's breaking our view down into more of a sinusoidal view that shows when there's bearish intention, price is going to be trading below this black bar, which is pivot. And when there's bullish intention, it's going to be trading above pivot. And you'll kind of notice as we move through these bars as the day continues on, you'll notice that blue price on the left hand side of my chart, it changes. So for example, at this level, it was at 67.78. If I go all the way back here, price is at 67.60. If I go here, it's 66.75. So you kind of notice that even though it looks like these candles are all at the same price, because it's that sinusoidal movement, it's not really showing like a linear chart here. So don't get confused if you're like, well, wait a minute, we're trading at 68.90. Like, why are so many other price points close to 68.90? They're not, right? So even here, 67.30, and then all the way over here, it's at 68.69. So just one thing to keep in mind, and it's one thing that people do kind of have to get used to when they start trading fractals, is I don't really spend too much time looking at uh, the historic candles. I spend a lot of time looking at the price points on the right-hand side of the screen and then understanding currently where Vector is sitting. Another thing I do look at is how Vector has been moving. We've obviously seen throughout the day and throughout ETH session that Vector has been trending pretty strong. So I do have an expectation of Vector being relatively supportive as well. But looking below pivot for any sort of bearish intention and opportunities for bounces, I do see an open state formed here back on 10/23 at 68.57.61. The reason I really like this is it's also in the zone of our wave one daily open state. So let's go mark this 68.57. I'm just going to say 68.57.60 as an open state on the wave 760. Wave 760. So I'm just going to copy that and go wave 760. And that'll be at, I'll grab that number again. That's at 68.57. 68.57.50. Right there. Definitely going to mark that as a zone within my gray box. Okay. Looking over to our next area here. So we're going to zoom in a little bit more. The next thing we're going to zoom into is our 20-way 15-minute. See what we got here. The one thing I will be doing too, especially as we get into New York Open, is the fractal charts, they update constantly, which is really, really great because you're constantly getting new information at kind of like where open states are and especially where vector is. Now, a lot of times our open states remain, relatively stable, and those will be valid levels, I would say, for most of like New York session, for example. But another tip that I do have is like if you guys are trading ETH and you mark out like a vector level or any sort of open state level, I would only consider that level valid from like Asia session to Europe session. So like if you mark a level and you plan on trading during Europe session, I would not like take those levels as gospel when we enter into Europe session in case there's any sort of like increased volatility or large movement. So like my rule of thumb is any sort of levels that I mark, I want them to be valid for the session that I'm trading. And then, like, if we move into Asia session or Europe session, I would remark levels just to make sure that one, they're stable, or if there were any significant changes in things like volatility or where a vector is sitting, I wouldn't want to accidentally be like blowing through a level just because we assumed the level was going to be good through every single trading session. So, just a tip to have there. Okay, so back to this. Um, the 20 by 15 minute, you'll notice we're not overextended anymore. And that's because we're looking at a shorter time frame. And if we go back into our linear chart, you can see that, like I said, over all of ETH session, we've been really consolidated in this area. So we're not going to see this large overextension on our midterm time frames because we're looking at less history in bar charts. So going into this then, we'll notice that our vector is at 6882.60, which this is actually a good thing to note. We saw that on our wave 1 daily, our 7 wave 60, and now our 20 wave 15, that our vector is between 6880 and 6883. So right now I'm seeing that area as a pretty supportive zone. One of the things I will say, because price has been consolidating in this area, I'm not going to be taking a vector bounce or reject this morning until we see some type of trend form a little bit more on our vector. Because honestly, again, right, this is a really good example of fractals being more sinusoidal as opposed to linear, is it looks like our vector was much higher in this area. But if you look at that blue price point, it's still trading at 68.82, 68.83 in this zone. So vector hasn't really had a trend for most of ETH. This is a huge indicator for me to not want to take it as a bounce or a reject because vector is currently acting as an anchor for our price. One of the things I do want to look at here on this lower time frame, though, is we do have another open state down here at this 68.56 area. This one looks like it's at like 68.56.85, so we could say 68.57, also paired with our 10% odds of continuation, which means if we do get down to this 68.57 area, there's a 10% probability on the 20-way 15 that we will continue down further. So these are two confluences that I do really like for bounces. Not to mention the 6857 area has been a pretty like dense area on our larger time frames. So I am going to mark this one as well for 20 by 15 for an open state for support. So we'll start getting messy here, but the good news is the more open states we have, the more, the better chance we have of actually bouncing. So this is wave 2015 min open state. Mark that. And that one was at, I'll grab the number again. 68. We're gonna say 6857. That one, which I think is actually the same. So right there. It's the same as 7 wave 60. Okay. Let's zoom in a little bit more. All right, so this is our 10 wave 15 minute, a little bit smaller time frame. Again, we can see 6856 is an open state on the 10 wave 15 minutes, so we do like that support. The other thing I do want to show you guys too, though, right, is as we're kind of going into those smaller time frames, you can see more resistive areas closer to the price point we're currently at. Our vector right now is around 60.82, so we're seeing consistency there. We're seeing vector as an anchor in that zone. But you can kind of notice we have an open state at 68.75, an open state at 68.70, even all the way at 68.79, 77, so 68.80. Um, I tend to kind of ignore these open states unless we have a lot of other open states on larger time frames for two reasons. This is a pretty small time frame, so while you may find opportunity to scalp off of filling these open states, one of the big things I notice is that we're like even on the 6780 open state, we haven't even hit our 80% odds of continuation, which means that if price were to move down to this 80% odds level, there's an 80% chance price is going to continue lower. So, you're kind of fighting against the odds in that area, especially if you do start having a measured move down and start seeing things like your depth of market kind of go into favor of sellers. While there could potentially be opportunities for scalping at these singular open states on these lower time frames, I tend to kind of completely ignore them, simply because with an 80% odds of continuation past 6877, and this being the only open state I've noted in this area, I don't really want to try to take those odds. Like I really like these like high probability one trade a day types of setups. Looking above, we do have a zone at 68.99. That's where our open state was, and it was actually our high of day on the start of our ETH session. So there is potential for trying to reject at 68.99 to 6,900. But again, even on our 10-way 15-minute, there's a 50% of odds of continuation further, all the way up for another 30 points. So we have seen some resistive areas on those open states. But because we at that point we would be above our implied volatility walls that our market makers have set for us, I would kind of treat that as an outlier day and not want to be looking to long above 6,900. If we get above that zone and kind of break and hold above our IV walls, that's kind of a hands-off day for me because the potential for going up further, especially in our larger time frames, is very limited. And because we're outside of our implied volatility walls, our market makers are going to be doing a lot to try to keep us either pinned to a ceiling or back below those levels. So 68.56, we have something on the 10-way 15-minute as well. I'm gonna go mark that. 68.56. And I can just change this. We're gonna make a whole mess out of this chart by putting zones in here. 68.56. It's another zone. So I'm actually really liking this zone as a whole for a supportive area. I would probably be trying, like I said, 61 to 52 is a pretty big zone. I'd probably be trying an entry at around 68.57 or 68.58, just to give us like a little bit less loss exposure as we hit this supportive zone and have any sort of invalidation be a break below this cluster of open states. All right, let's go into an even smaller time frame. 7-way 5-minute. Oh, again, it's really small time frame. You can see all these different zones here. Like we have open states at 87, 91, 93, 94 to the top side. So you could actually even look, this is a little bit more of a promising open state mark here. Like if you really did want to try to reject that like 6,900 area, you could even start it as early as 68.91. Now again, the 10-point zone is a little bit big for rejection, especially because that would be above our IV walls. But another example of seeing just a little bit more density at that like 6,900 area where that open state was on our wave one daily initially. So again, vector is really consistent here because price has been consolidating all day. We have some zones here at 68.74, 68.72. We're seeing a lot of overextension when we get down into 67 and 65. And again, this is because we're on a really, really low time frame. We're looking at a smaller portion of price action. And so essentially, because we've been consolidating all evening, the 7-way 5-minute is saying, hey, like we've been consolidating for the past, X amount of time. I don't expect us to move much further than where this consolidation is. So you can even see like 68.62 is where the 1% odds are on this chart. So even where we're kind of mapping our open states, I actually really like this because where we're mapping our open states on our linear chart right now, between this like 61 and 52 area, we would be so overextended on the 7-way 5-minute, there's a 1% chance of continuation down beyond this level. So if we were to get to that like 57 area, I would personally really like that for a bounce because our 7-way 5-minute and our 50-way 1-minute respectively is going to show that we're very, very overextended. Let's go look at the 50-way 1-minute. This is the smallest time frame I look at. And you can kind of see, right? 2% odds on this one is 68.73. So this one is really implying like a pretty small range. It's like a 20-point range right now. So I think for me, my A plus setup on ES right now is going to probably be a bounce at 68.57 with invalidation of this below 68.52 is going to be what I'm looking at this morning when we get into open and try to see what goes on. Like I said, we do have opportunity at 68.90 all the way up to 68.96 for open state rejections. There is possibility there, and then it would ideally reject us back into our IV walls. My A plus setup this morning is going to be probably this particular line in my zone at 68.57.50. All right, guys. Well, market's opening here in about 30 minutes, so I think I'm gonna go grab myself some coffee. But I hope this was informative for you guys. I tried to take a couple baby steps through looking at our fractal charts to kind of give you guys some understanding of what I'm looking for when I look at fractals. Every day I will try to layer in just a few more concepts so we can all get comfortable with like what an open state is, what vector is. Ideally see it playing in different versions of price action. But also if you guys are interested in looking at any other charts, just let me know in chat, and we can kind of try to build some high probability zones in that as well. But otherwise, guys, I will talk to you later. And if you guys are in our premium chat in Ascend, I will be talking to you guys in about 30 minutes. So have a great week, everybody.